My name is Terry Lynn Morrison. I'm a Mi'kmaq from the East Coast, so home to me is Listigurich. That is just on the border of Quebec and New Brunswick and Mi'kma'ki. So I'm the executive director at Luminary and very happy to be hosting you all here today. We were going to get into the agenda. I'll give you a quick overview about what we're going to be talking about. So we're going to do a couple of breakout sessions in our programming. And in order to get organized for that, I know we sent an email out yesterday asking to identify theme one, whether you want to talk about strategy, leadership, or research, or theme two, if you want to talk about case studies and curriculum. But we didn't get everybody answering. So, what I'd like to ask of you today is if you could take a moment to rename yourself on your screen. So, using the three little dots up on the corner and just put a one or a two in front of your name, and then our team on the back end will get those breakout sessions queued up. So when it's time to go in, you'll be redirected automatically. So I'll do it on mine just to kind of show what we're looking for. I put a two in front of my name. So that means I'll be talking about case study and curriculum. So if you can all take a moment to do that while I'm talking for the next few minutes, that would be really appreciated. If you have any trouble and you're not able to rename yourself, just put something in the chat and somebody will catch it and be able to put you in the right group. All right, so like I mentioned, we have a number of thought leaders, exciting messages that we're going to share today. So we are going to kick it off with some thought leaders that are going to bring us into our first round of breakout sessions. And what we want you to do really at that first breakout is just get to know your group. So you'll be in smaller groups at about five and get to know each other and talk about what resonated. So as you're listening to the first part of our program, just think about what stood out and what you want to talk more about and what gets you excited about the opportunities that exist for us in the space that we're in. And then we will be then going into deeper presentations on the two mission critical themes. So we're going to talk about strategy, leadership, and research. We have a number of subject matter experts that are going to be sharing their ideas and their perspectives. And then we will go into case study and curriculum. And then we will have a 30-minute breakout session with your smaller groups again, and there will be some questions that we're asking and a couple of interactive activities that we'll do. So you're not just sitting for the next 2.5 hours, we will be engaging with you. So yay. And then we'll talk about some reflections, what we've heard from the group really quickly, and then go into the Charter for Change program, and we'll wrap it up with what's coming up in the next year as we're looking forward in 2026 and the work that Luminary is doing. So before we keep going, I want to take a moment to thank our partners who contributed to funding to supporting Luminary. So we are funded by the Government of Canada through ISED's Strategic Science Fund. We've also just announced yesterday RBC as a partner. They're supporting us with $250,000 over the next 2 years to deliver our programming. So really thankful for their contribution. And then also our Charter for Change academic partners who have joined Luminary and who are aligning with our mission and vision and are supporting us as well. So thank you all for that. I just want to touch briefly on some of the highlights of the last year. As you know, Luminary is a newer organization, so we were just created in 2024. 2025 was really a year of organizing, getting our team together, and looking at the strategic plays that we can make. And some of the things that we did, our biggest project actually was the Canadian Business School Indigenous Engagement report. And we will drop the links into the chat. So if you haven't had a chance to look at it, it's on our website and you can go and take a peek at it. But that was just launched last week. And essentially, we had 48 business schools participate in a very extensive survey to see where they are in terms of engaging with Indigenous communities, businesses, academic researchers, and what they're doing in terms of curriculum, pedagogy, research collaborations, and partnerships. So this engagement report is actually setting the stage for the work that Luminary is going to be doing in the next year in terms of being able to support these academic institutions in their journey towards reconciliation with Indigenous communities. So that's a really big file that we're proud of, and we will be kicking it off again this year to do round two. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on. We also had our annual report from 2024-25. That's another thing that's available on our website if you want to take a look at. We launched a monthly webinar series where we're talking with different subject matter experts on a number of topics from seaweed to indigenizing curriculum. So there's past events that we've hosted, and the recordings are all available on our website. So I invite you if you want to take a look and see what type of things we're talking about or upcoming webinars that'll be happening again in March, then I invite you to register and join us. Every month, we're excited about the turnout. We've been increasing our numbers every month. So thank you all for those who have participated and continue to come back. We also launched our website, so luminary.works. That is there, and where we're going to be archiving and working on building a platform about Indigenous innovation and what, kind of archiving the work that we're doing and having a place for people to turn to when they're looking for information. And, we went to a lot of events, but the one that stood out the most to us was the time that we spent in the Atlantic at St. FX University during the Atlantic Business School Deans Conference and the Indigenous scholars. We had an opportunity to sit with that group and listen and learn. And, we're looking forward to more opportunities to be able to do that in the coming year. So just kind of briefly touching on some of the highlights of 2025, and we'll talk more about what's to come in 2026 at the end. So another thing that we did in 2025 is we put a couple of memorandums of understanding, partner agreements in place with three very important groups. So one of them being the Administrative Science Association of Canada, so that's ASAC. It's a group of about 700 academics that come together. They've formed the newly Indigenous Knowledges Association, and they are co-hosting the Indigenous Colloquium with Luminary that's going to take place in Calgary, May 21st of this year. So it's a really important relationship for us to have because it gives us the opportunity to interact with the academic network. So really thankful about that partnership. And then we're working with Carolyn Hilton and her team at Indigenomics that really has a pulse on the Indigenous business scene and all of the players that are in that field. So this is really important in the work that Luminary is doing to be able to bring together academic institutions and Indigenous business to be able to talk about research potential and opportunities to push the needle forward when it comes to innovating, whether that's products, processes, or whatever that looks like. So Indigenomics is a key player for us, and we're having a kickoff meeting with them actually tomorrow to talk about some of the projects that we can work on together over the next year. And then more recently, we have the Dean's Council of Agriculture, Food, and Veterinary Medicine. So it's a group of 13 schools in Canada that are looking to do the same that we did with the business schools. So they are interested in our engagement survey. They want to see how they're doing when it comes to engaging with Indigenous communities and how they can improve on that. So we're excited to have that. That's a newly formed partnership. We're still in the midst of scheduling our kickoff to talk about some of the key activities that we can agree upon, but very excited about that. And just a little quick view about the ASAC partnership. So it's really a collaborative partnership between ASAC and Luminary to foster meaningful knowledge exchange, research collaborations, and learning opportunities aligned with Indigenous business and community priorities. So that's number one, of course, always in the best interest of our Indigenous communities. And they are talking about the annual Indigenous Colloquium. So I've been lucky enough to work with David Deephouse, who is a professor at the Business School of University of Alberta for the last almost year now, talking about programming for this colloquium. We're bringing the Indigenous voices to this space and showing, academics, faculty, whoever the audience is at these colloquiums, the potential of Indigenous businesses and the sophistication that they have actually when it comes to some of the projects that they're doing in their community. So we're giving that exposure that they haven't had before, and it's been really successful. So that's another nice partnership that we have, and that feels really good. So without further ado, I am going to turn it over to Kelly Lindsay, our Chief Transformation Officer here at Luminary, who is going to walk us through today's themes and program. So over to you, Kelly.
Thank you very much, Terry Lynn. And first of all, Leona, to our elder, thank you so much. And you talked about innovation, free trade. We've been doing it for thousands of years and harnessing traditional knowledge, ancient knowledge. And I thought that's such a good setup for what we're talking about here, how to ignite that in the modern sense. So after listening, as Terry Lynn laid out to you, we've been working and listening and working with people. Really, this forum is shaped around the input you had around these two mission critical themes. So we're looking at the area of strategy, leadership, and research and case study and curriculum. But to kickstart this, we're going to go to five key thought leaders. But I'm also so very pleased. Oh, I want to do a shout out to our international guests who've joined. This is the ANZAM, the Australian New Zealand Academy of Management, our mob. Teresa Rose from Athabasca. We were down at the ANZAM conference in December. The short little lady in the front, Elder Ella Henry, is a retired prof from New Zealand. Some players here. We've got Michelle Evans, the president and CEO of the Dylan Dua Leadership Center for Indigenous Excellence. And she's on our international advisory circle for luminaries, along with Charlene Leroy Dyer from Brisbane University, Jason Mika from the University of Auckland, Mark Jones is in there. So again, big shout out to those folks. I know it's really early. Thanks for being here. All right, so what we're going to do is to kickstart this, you're going to hear some different thoughts and ideas from these leaders. Ann Noonan and Charlie are going to set the stage, taking us all back to the 90s in Oka. Then to our friend David Newhouse to talk from Oka 1997, the cost of doing nothing, to today, Indigenous economies, innovation, and well-being. Then to our friend Dr. Andy Hoffman from Michigan University, it's time to rejuvenate business education. To Manly Begay, in Indigenous innovation, the time is now. And wrap up, Dr. Wanda Watney, you're not alone in this journey. So get ready to listen. We're going to go through this fast-paced, and then after that, go into our first breakout session.
In the mid to late 90s, there was a tremendous amount of political action taking place across the country. But then the Oka crisis happened in Quebec, and it was a very unsettling time for all of us Canadians and all of us as First Nations people and Indigenous peoples. It galvanized so many of our concerns, and concerns is our complaints, our issues. Like, no one was listening, and it was so incredible that this had to happen till someone listened.
Relationship between corporate Canada and Indigenous peoples in the early 90s was a more rocky relationship. As time went on, the Royal Commission on Aboriginal People released a report in October of 1996. And it was a Royal Commission that was 5 years in the making. Report, a very voluminous report, nearly 4,900 pages, one of the most expensive Royal Commissions in the history of Canada. A year or so later, we at the Royal Bank were approached to do some papers, if you will, related to the Royal Commission. And we at the Royal Bank, led by our chief economist, who teamed up with Kelly Lindsay and others to produce something called The Cost of Doing Nothing. And that was launched in October of 1997. was groundbreaking in that we focused corporate Canada on the need to change the paradigm when it comes to dealing with Canada's Indigenous peoples.
So from there, Charlie Coffey mentioned, the cost of doing nothing. The fellow that was leading the Council for the Advancement of Native Development Officers Education Committee was Dr. David Newhouse. And David is the one that really came up with the concept of the cost of doing nothing, producing some papers and doing a series of papers and action agendas. And so David was there. That's how we got to know each other from the 90s. He's going to talk about from the cost of doing nothing to the need for change today.
So what I want to say are two things, I think. The first is that things have changed, that there has been an enormous amount of change in the Indigenous economy over the last half century. And the second point I want to make is that most Canadians and most academics, most professors in business schools don't see the change. And so as we begin to talk about trying to ensure that business schools are able to make a solid contribution to our development, we have to go back and begin to help our colleagues understand where we came from and where we're going. We started down this path in 1971 with Wablung, a report by the Indian chiefs of Manitoba that set out the basic economic development strategy that we are following and that have been following for the last half century or so. And what Wablung said was that we need to start with recognizing our rights as Indigenous people. We need to develop a homegrown strategy. That is, we need to develop a strategy for ourselves, and that strategy ought to be comprehensive. And that's the approach that we've been following for the last half century, and we're beginning to get some results. And we're at the point now where we have an enormous set of institutions that support economic development. We have an enormous number of businesses, and we have a structure that is keen on development. And we have national capital corporations. We have access to capital. Right? We have now access to land, to resources, and we're in the process of developing a labor force. And so, in a sense, we have all the things that we need in order to effectively participate in a market economy. And it's beginning to show some results. The Indigenous economy is about $50 billion a year. When we started in 1971, and when I graduated in 1978, we did not talk of something called an Indigenous economy. Today, we talk of several Indigenous economies. We are making enormous strides, so I'm very hopeful about what may happen down the road. But what is also important is not just that we develop the institutional infrastructure, but we've also developed the attitudes and skills that can make that institutional infrastructure work effectively. We're now confident. We now are pro-development, but we recognize the limits. We're also trying to ensure that we tackle development within our own communities using ideas from our own intellectual traditions, from Indigenous knowledge. And we're not afraid to blend what we know with what we bring from the West. And we're creating something new, something different, and we're creating something that works for ourselves. One of the challenges that we face is that this new reality isn't reflected in business schools' curriculum. And so one of the things that we need to do is to engage business school faculty to bring this reality into the business school, not just for Indigenous students, but for all students so that they understand and so that they can make a contribution. And it's only by ensuring that everyone understands that we are part now of the business community, we're part of the economic community, we're part of the economic infrastructure of the country, and that we have something to contribute, that we can begin to move forward and make an even larger contributions and develop our own communities. And so what that means is hiring faculty, supporting research, developing curriculum material, and more importantly, is building relationships with Indigenous communities, Indigenous leaders, Indigenous business, Indigenous economic development officers, all of those who are involved in the development of our own community.
Super. David's been on this journey a long time, and this leads to the change that we want to create and the whole concept that we talked about. How could we harness research and innovation? And this led to the first initiative in 2019, where we explored this idea of transforming the Indigenous economy by harnessing research, bringing the academic and the Indigenous business community together. And Manly Begay was our first keynote speaker when we brought over 200 people together in Fredericton. Listen to Manly Begay.
Yeah, thank you, Kelly. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Manly Begay. I'm a professor at Northern Arizona University and a former co-director of the Harvard Project on American Indian Economic Development. And I'm very happy to be with you to talk about Indigenous innovation and and how this work is progressing at the moment. But before I get into that, let me just take you on a real quick journey back to the 1500s. In the 1500s, what's really interesting, at least to me, is there was this sovereign to sovereign relationship with the colonists that came to North America. And and the relationship was really one of a government to government relationship. And subsequent years, things change very quickly, all through the Royal Proclamation and through civilizing the Indian treaties, Indian Act, white papers in the 60s, and amendments to the Indian Act in the 70s. So during that time, First Nations really had very little power or authority. And then in the mid 70s to the 80s, things began to change, where you began to have modern day treaties and the recognition and the affirmation of Aboriginal rights, duty to consult, and so that change and led to First Nation peoples really gaining more power and authority. And then all of a sudden now we find ourselves within the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report and 94 calls to action, and there's a self-government movement actually occurring. So it's within this context that the work is occurring around how to transform the economy, Indigenous economy. In the Harvard Project, we did quite a bit of work around understanding why is it that some First Nations do better economically than others, and it's all about political sovereignty. It's all about jurisdiction. It's all about good governing institutions. It's about separating business from politics. And so we're in that historical moment in time where First Nation peoples are essentially beginning to run their own economies, their own political structures, and we're finding many successful First Nations like Member 2, Suyus, and many others. And so this work that's occurring around innovation and transforming the economy is happening right at the right moment. So we've only been dealing with this transformation in the last 30, maybe 40 years. It's a very short period of time. So we have a lot of work to do in figuring out how do we move First Nations forward. So in 2019, I was invited to give a presentation at Fredericton, New Brunswick, and there were over 200 people there where we launched an idea and a bold agenda and how to transform the economy, how to do it, how to move it forward. What should the foundation look like? And and interestingly enough, corporate Canada were there, First Nation leaders were there, private entrepreneurs were there, government was there. And in the context of truth and reconciliation, there really needed to be action. There needed to be some way to ignite these ideas and to move it forward. And clearly, research was a big part of it. How do you connect research to industry and to Indigenous businesses and communities? And this was the beginning of a discussion of how to do that. We also moved from there toward a gathering in 2025 on the Gila River Indian community in Arizona, where the first Indigenous Innovation Summit occurred. And First Nation leaders from all across Canada, as well as even Australia and New Zealand, were there to think through how this might happen and how this foundation can be laid. So we're right in the midst of a tremendous amount of change, and I think we ought not to waste a lot of time. Rather, we should focus on really thinking through how do we do this? How do we ignite Indigenous innovation? How do we move forward and create governing institutions that work? How do we move forward so that we could create Indigenous economies that work? So, in the nearly 500-year history of Canada and First Nation peoples, now is the time to act, it seems to be. Now is the time to do this. I think we have all the tools to form a strong foundation for, how to advance First Nations thinking in a new modern day Canada.
Thank you, Manley. Moving along, I had this great opportunity to meet Dr. Andy Hoffman, and many of you know him in the academic circles. And he was 3 years ago when we talked about the luminary concept about engaging the Indigenous community and business community with the academic community. We've stayed in touch. He was speaking last year, and he's going to offer some thoughts about rejuvenating business education.
I mean, my argument in the book is that business schools have ossified. They're designed for a world that no longer exists. They haven't really changed much in 40 or 50 years, really focusing on some fairly stale notions of how the Western economy should work. And so now it's time to rethink that. We need to start to do some amendments to capitalism as it's presently configured. And business schools themselves need to be a player in that process. And so as I see schools starting to focus on some of the failures of capitalism, like climate change or inequality, they typically do it by just dropping elective into the curriculum, but that's not going to work because the overall curriculum is still pushing ideas like the purpose of the firm is to make money for the shareholder, leaving aside the environment or the community. Government has a limited role in the market. Efficiency is always good. People are inherently selfish. Nature only has value as a resource for our supply chains and our consumption, which itself is unquestioned. We are here to consume. All those aspects are embedded within the business school curriculum as we know it today. And so we need to really rethink that. And my ideas around rejuvenation and bringing the moral focus back are motivated in part by a book by Rakesh Khurana at Harvard. It's called From Higher Aims to Hired Hands. And he points out that when business schools were first proposed, they had the idea of training future business leaders in the same spirit we train doctors to serve society. And his point is we've missed that mandate. We've lost it. We've become skill shops. We help people get jobs. We don't do anything around the area of moral formation or really thinking, we focus on the how of business, but we give very little attention to the why. And so that's why I like what you're doing, because I think business schools right now, some get it, most don't, but they will, of recognizing that what they're teaching is inadequate and they need to rethink the curriculum to bring it in line with 21st century realities rather than remaining stuck in the realities of 1960 or 1970. And so as we cast about to think about new ways of thinking about the curriculum, we can look around the world. We can also look right here. And Indigenous communities have something to offer the conversation in terms of sense of community, how economies are structured, how engagement happens, the role of elders. All these things and more come in where I would hope that business schools can see that the Indigenous perspective, the value proposition for business schools is more than just butts in seats paying tuition or subjects to be the sites of our research studies, but to be sources of knowledge and wisdom of alternative ways of thinking about how an economy can work, how business can work, not as a replacement, but as a way to augment and improve. And that's perhaps the most important message of the book. I'm not saying we need to tear capitalism down, but I am saying that we need to amend it. And there are many people saying this, not just me. Joseph Stiglitz says that capitalism needs to be saved from itself. Paul Pullman, former CEO of Unilever, says it's a damaged ideology that needs to be reinvented for the 21st century. I can even quote Tucker Carlson, who says that capitalism is a tool, like a staple gun or a toaster. If it's broken, fix it. That's what I'm advocating for. And to fix it, we need other ideas, other ways of thinking about this. And so that's why I'm excited about what you're doing with your group, Kelly, and the value you can bring to business schools to start to rethink some taken for granted notions on how to teach business better and be effective stewards of tomorrow's markets that will reduce, if not eliminate, their damage to the natural environment and foster societies where everyone gets a fair shot rather than the unequal societies we're having right now, where the privileged few get the majority of the wealth.
We've got so many committed folks on this forum that want to look at how we can build and do this in Canada, the United States, Australia, New Zealand, and around the world. So we look forward to this journey together. Thank you again, my friend, for joining us. Miigwech, Tapuina Naskomin.
My pleasure, Kelly. Thank you.
Folks, our last thought leader to get you ready to ignite the conversations in the 2 breakout sessions this afternoon is our friend, Dr. Wanda Watney. And again, Wanda goes back to the 90s with David Newhouse, myself and others, all involved with the start of the Journal of Aboriginal Economic Development and the Aboriginal Economic Development Officers Program. And here's Wanda's thoughts to ignite the conversation.
Thank you, Kelly, so much for this opportunity to share some thoughts. I really appreciate it. Yes, for more than 35 years, this has been a passion of mine to explore Indigenous economic development. And it's so exciting to see so many people interested in this area. There are so many incredible stories of resilience and just so much diversity within the 1.8 million Indigenous people in Canada in this area. And so for business schools to be looking at this with greater interest, it's so exciting. Such an adventure, I think, to come together and to see what can be done in such a good way. Putting your minds together to help not only our future leaders, but the children, for our communities and for this nation, Canada. Better together, I think, to make a way where it might seem a little bit challenging, but that's okay. Good things are challenging and do take a bit of work, but together, I think that this is an awesome, awesome journey and adventure that is just going to be a win-win for everybody. Business schools are not alone on this journey. There are a number of other faculties and departments that are so interested in this area as well. It's a very broad area, and it is an open field for collaboration.
Tremendous. Folks, that wraps up the first round, and you're now going to go into your first breakout session. You might have teams of 3, 4, 5. Introduce yourself, what resonated. Take about 2 minutes per team member. And if you could have a host volunteer monitor the time. Okay, so you've had a chance to meet each other, and you're going to meet this group in the next breakout session. The next part of this is to take you through, Tasha Brooks and Craig are going to take you through theme 1, strategy, leadership, and a research focus. And then I'll take you through case study and a curriculum focus. So each of these are to provide a setup to ignite your conversations, and the next breakout sessions are going to be longer. So over to you, Tasha.
Thank you, Kelly. You see me there?
I see the screen.
Okay, so Antha Samatinia, that's my traditional name. Dr. Tasha Brooks, the senior research lead here at Luminary, and also assistant prof in the School of Business at Royal Roads University. So I'm going to walk you through the key research and strategy findings from the first national baseline of Indigenous engagement in Canadian business schools. This is the first time that there's been a coordinated national picture of where this sector stands. So what follows is not an evaluation, it's just a baseline, it's a starting point for our collective institutional acceleration. So first, I just want to introduce the National Scholars Circle. We are bringing scholars from across Canada at different stages of their doctoral journey, and we even have one in Africa and the United States as one of our convening governance structures. So let's start with some research finding. So first, partnerships, they do exist across business schools, but we found that engagement with Indigenous businesses, that remains limited. Many schools reported on collaboration with Indigenous communities and organizations, but few have those direct partnerships with Indigenous entrepreneurs or Indigenous Economic Development Corporation. And economic reconciliation, it really lives in enterprise and economic development. And this is where our engagement remains thin. Second, curriculum research and partnerships, they are emerging. Roughly half of business schools, they offer courses in that have Indigenous content. And over 2/3, you're reporting on engaging in Indigenous research. So this signals activation. But the activity is fairly uneven and not yet systemic. So what is visible is engagement. And third, this Indigenous research activity, it is present. Many of the business schools are reporting on Indigenous research projects. On average, the schools reported 4 Indigenous focused projects and with an Indigenous component. And so that really matters. Before this survey, there was no real national picture that emerged. So in a country with many, many Indigenous entrepreneurs and over 500 economic development corporations, that signals where the opportunity lies. So we have some thought leaders that we have engaged for this theme. We have Ernie Daniels, the president and CEO of First Nations Finance Authority, to bring you a national perspective on Indigenous finance. We have Dr. Emily Salmon to contribute her leadership and insight on new Indigenous knowledges in administrative sciences, and Dr. David Newhouse, who brings his decades of scholarship and leadership experience in Indigenous global research. So this slide just really kind of grounds our conversation in the economic scale. The First Nations Finance Authority, it has facilitated over $4 billion in total loans. So this is Indigenous-led capital deployment at a very large scale. And here's Ernie to talk about this.
Thank you, Kelly. Yeah, really important area to focus on with the research and innovation. The First Nation Finance Authority, who I work for, is one of four institutions that are currently operating under the First Nation Fiscal Management Act, which was truly innovative at the time when the act came into force in 2006. It just meant a different pathway for First Nations to consider how they do financial management and how they develop more revenue generating systems like property taxation and leveraging their own source revenue. So our first bond went out in 2014 for $90 million at the time, with 11 First Nations participating in that debenture. Debenture bond can be used in the same terminology. And just recently, last year, we issued $1.2 billion in bond financing. This new evolution of equity financing major projects that Canada is actually looking for in their One Economy, the Bill C5, they're going to be looking into areas that do require research and innovation. Like traditional knowledge from our communities should be a part of what becomes the step to realizing a lot of these projects, like whether you're extracting minerals or you're building new electrical facilities to service whatever is coming next, in the AI area, work needs to be done in that area. So traditional knowledge, ownership, uses of it, and what it can be used for to support this is really, truly important. And it needs to become just a necessary step, not a necessary, but a required step in the journey to getting these projects off the ground so that Canada and the First Nations can really enjoy the benefits of that in terms of revenues that can help our nations become economically self-sufficient.
Thank you for that. Now we move along to Dr. Emily Salmon, really representing the next phase of research and innovation found within business scholarship and ASAC. So welcome, Emily.
Yeah, the division has really been a labor of love from multiple people. We've realized that there's a growing space of folks doing Indigenous-related research. And so we were really fortunate to connect with Andre, who's been a wonderful support, as well as so many other folks at ASAC. And we've been able to launch our new division this year, which is really meant to advance and promote high quality research related to Indigenous business and all things administrative sciences. And then most importantly, to create a sense of community and just like a welcoming kind of home for those of us engaged in Indigenous research or teaching, thinking about how we're indigenizing business schools. And so we're really lucky to have an amazing executive team of all Indigenous scholars from coast to coast. So this is our first year we'll be launching, and we've got some wonderful, wonderful opportunities planned. So yeah, Heitsapka.
Now up, we're going to be chatting with David Newhouse. His work has consistently centered Indigenous self-determination, institutional development, and community-driven economic futures. So we're lucky to hear from you today.
You've also talked about how this could expand to global innovation and the global reach with Indigenous people. Can you comment on that?
Well, I think there are some examples about how to work together that we can bring to the table. Right. We can also begin to talk with our colleagues in Australia and New Zealand, who are doing some of this work as well. And particularly, I think, in Latin America, particularly in the large urban populations, right? Because one of the areas that is unfortunately not well examined in Canada is the urban Indigenous population and economic development in that environment. And in Latin America and in parts of New Zealand and parts of Australia, urban Indigenous communities are doing interesting things and are beginning to develop their communities as economies. And so if we can understand what they're doing, right, I think we can also bring some of that back to Canada.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, David. So basically, the baseline has done its job. It shows us that activity exists. It also shows us where engagement is thin. And this shows us where the opportunity, it is significant. So the next phase is this intentional expansion. We want to have more collaborative research with Indigenous business, more business development and sector-specific work, more direct partnerships with Indigenous economic development corporations, and really this deeper integration of Indigenous business into core curriculum. And so that is really, I think, how sectors move from this activation phase to really thinking institutionalization. We're moving from this baseline, and now we're wanting to really create this momentum and this impact. So thanks, Kelly.
Tremendous, Tasha. And 48 schools report in the business school survey. There's 130 in Canada. And so there's great opportunities lying ahead. And looking now from the research, looking more specifically at strategy and leadership, we've been starting to introduce this through the monthly webinars that Terry Lynn mentioned. And so here was one looking at this specific topic of strategies, practices, and behaviors. So this is the way we're looking at using knowledge mobilization to accelerate your work. But in addition, we're looking at how do we incorporate both foundation learning. So executives, whether they're in business schools, public sector, government, or private sector, need knowledge capital, and that's on the x-axis. And then, of course, from that foundational learning, how do you actually develop the leadership and strategies with practices, tactics, behaviors to improve your overall performance? So that's what this slide illustrates, and this is what Craig Hall is going to speak to in terms of how we can support and advance the strategy side of this agenda.
So in this slide here, what you see depicted is a kind of an XY axis. On the left side, we're showing the set of cultural competencies that need to be developed and enhanced within business schools, among the management and executives that run the business schools. And on the y-axis, we've got a series of programs planned, learning programs that address the various strategies that are needed by the business schools in their efforts to engage at various levels with the Indigenous community, whether it's for research collaborations or for workplace matters pertaining to the hiring of more Indigenous instructors, professors, and so on, as well as other matters that you see outlined here. So the idea here is that in the near future, what we'll be doing is developing a series of learning programs that members of our Luminary community can partake of, with the idea of building their competencies and growing these different strategies, which is the ultimate aim, is to use our two-eyed seeing approach and the information gathered through these sessions will really help you to do the engagement needed to grow the enrollment, grow the collaborations, and grow the various things that are needed with the Indigenous community.
Great. So to hear the importance of strategy and where we're at, Gina Grandi is the chair of the Business School Association of Canada, the Dean of Haskayne School of Business.
As deans of business schools, we recognize more needs to be done in our commitment to truth and reconciliation. And I would suggest we also recognize there's a long way to go to meet that commitment. We are all also at different stages of this journey, and for some of us, this is a first step. We need to invest in knowledge and working on understanding more fully the truth part of reconciliation first, in order for us to advance curriculum, student opportunities, and research pathways. I am excited about the possibilities that come with collaborating with Luminary and its ambitious plans to build strategies and tactics that support business schools at their stage in their journey.
Ambition is what's needed, Gina. We talked about that. Thank you very much. And now, Kristen Craig. This is from one of our Sask Polytechniques, one of the most progressive in the country. She's the Dean of Business and Management and Digital Innovation, and talk about the importance of strategy and the value of applied research.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. This is it's such a great question, and something that's near and dear to me. And when we think about applied research, it really has a different focus. I think what's the most important thing is we're solving real world problems. So, taking what students learn in the classroom and having them applied in a different way. But most importantly, it's helping those businesses, which has an impact on the community, on the organizations, and really helps in developing policy. And so when you take that application and you move it into that real world problem, it enriches the experience that our students have, and it supports, whatever organization is or community it is that the students are working with. And so when I think about it from the perspective of, in the Indigenous curriculum, if we had students that were working on applied research that only brought in their view from that westernized perspective, I think it limits the thinking that can happen and the value in that applied research. So when we look at it from, an Indigenous perspective, and we bring in that thoughtfulness and different ways in engaging with the curriculum, it helps us build different skills in those students who, realistically are probably going to become leaders. It helps them think about things in a different way. And I think what they come out with in the end is much richer than what they would have come out if they had that single-minded Western perspective, like, when I think about myself and the education that I received. So it's really challenging the assumptions that they have, and allowing them to think in a different way, which is really, really important.
All right. To help guide strategy, we have our third advisory group, the National Advisory Group. And so folks that have chosen theme 1, strategy, leadership, research, those thought leaders have sort of set the stage to help ignite your discussions. Part 2, looking at theme 2, case study and curriculum. So this session, here are the thought leaders that are providing you with some perspectives, some progress that's been happening on this side of the agenda. Again, we've been hosting webinars with thought leaders. All of these folks were in Phoenix last year, as the one Manley mentioned when we did the first Indigenous Innovation Summit, Candace Loring from Genome BC, George Lafon, Dean Keith Willoughby. And so again, this was identified as a priority for this forum to look at where and how we can advance case study and curriculum agenda. One of our facilitators, friends, and guides by this side is Dr. Mark Belletz, retired professor from Harvard School of Business, who supported the design and facilitation of the summit and has been working with us. And he's going to talk about the Latin American Research Center and how that can inform on a Lodge Center concept for Canada.
Great, thanks, Kelly. And last year at the summit, we did spend a fair amount of time talking about case studies, the lack of great Indigenous case studies, and the value of case studies in education, both MBA and executive. And there's a whole set of reasons that Harvard Business School developed the case study method just over 100 years ago, back in 1924. But perhaps the most important reason that we still use case studies today is that students have a chance to learn as much from one another as they do from faculty, and it gives students a chance to hear their peers reflecting on exactly the same situation, but in very different ways. And the fact that we don't have a lot of Indigenous case studies suggests that there's a huge opportunity for filling that gap. Harvard Business School, back in the year 2000, faced an analogous situation with the almost complete absence of case studies based in Latin America. And so if you look at the case study library in 2000, there were a handful of very technical LATAM cases that almost no one taught. So as part of Harvard's global initiative back in 2000, they created something called the Latin America Research Center. It was designed to do case research, case writing on cases from companies across Latin America. And now today, 26 years later, the LARC has offices in Montevideo, Mexico City, and Sao Paulo, and has developed a very nice suite of cases that are taught routinely at HBS, both in the MBA program and in our executive education programs. So the LARC began as a center primarily focused on case research, case development, but over the years it's broadened from just developing cases to serving as a hub within the region for relationships with companies and organizations, for giving MBA students from HBS opportunities to come into the region through something we call the Field Program, a Field Immersion Experience for Leadership, and give them a window of time to embed themselves in LATAM companies and experience business in the region firsthand. Then about 12 years after the formation of the LARC, André Esteves, who is the chairman and controlling shareholder of a Brazilian investment bank, one of the systemically important banks in Brazil, called BTG Pactual, André made a sizable donation to HBS. And by 2014, the Sao Paulo Center was fully operational. And by then, so 12 years ago, they'd already developed and published more than 200 case studies, research articles, and reports. And as I said, those are now routinely used. If you think about the LARC as building an ecosystem for Latin America for the school, there's a series of products, the cases themselves, podcasts, various faculty events. There's also a series of networks that have been established. There's an advisory board for the LARC. There's a broad alumni board of MBA and exec ed students who have gone through and used LARC-based case studies. there are business leaders in the region, and there are faculty who are part of the network and who travel there regularly. I retired a year and a half ago from the faculty, but to this day, I still go down to Latin America 3 or 4 times a year, and am still associated with the LARC. Now, the idea that came out of the Innovation Summit that we held in the Phoenix area last year was a center or lodge focused on developing Indigenous case studies, developing curricula that would be have an Indigenous element, and finding ways to capture and share traditional knowledge. And it occurred to me that the formation of this kind of lodge or center could mirror what we did at HBS when we formed the LARC. Similar initial mission on improving the quality and quantity of case studies, in this case, Indigenous case studies, improving curricula as well, and then really focused on preservation and sharing of traditional knowledge. There are a number of ways that this would diverge from what we did with the LARC, and probably the most important is trying to find ways to incorporate aspects of traditional tribal knowledge, tribal wisdom into the case studies themselves. So I'm sure you're all familiar with modalities like two-eyed seeing. And you could imagine building a case study where as you read through the case, you saw the two-eyed seeing method embedded in the way the case plays out. So you'd see Indigenous knowledge and Western knowledge side by side as in the case study itself. Navajo, as again, I'm sure you're familiar, has a modality called Beauty Wehosho. It's a way of life centered on balance, finding ways to walk with beauty in all directions. And again, I think you could find ways to develop case studies that included some of that perspective, some of that philosophy in the development of the case. And I think while this has an Indigenous focus, in my final years teaching at HBS, what became very clear is that students from the year 2000, when I first joined the faculty, had a very Western-focused way of looking at case studies and looking at business. And over the last 26 years, that has shifted to having much more of a sense of needing to see the human side of business, the impact, the ability to do things that are important for people, not just for profit generation. And I think we could use an Indigenous case study center to help incorporate some of those philosophies and mindsets into the way that we would develop cases. I think if we built such a lodge, it would naturally partner with Indigenous faculty, Indigenous leaders from across the Americas, as well as business schools interested in using the research and publications of the center. I think we could create a very rich repository of case studies. The LARC developed hundreds and hundreds of them to date. I think we could do something very similar. We could also, through the center, provide orientation, training, other supports to help deliver case studies and curricula that the center was involved in building. So think of it as a series of workshops to make sure that faculty using these case studies were able to leverage the richness embedded in those cases. We could create something analogous to the HBS field program where students might spend time with Indigenous-led businesses, and it would be Indigenous-led. It would have institutional cooperative programming model, and as I said, ideally would generate a set of world-class case studies and curricula.
So from that, we have 2 more speakers on theme 2, and then we're going into our breakout room. From there, as Terry-Lynn mentioned, we were invited and participated with the Dean's Atlantic Council, and this whole idea really started to amplify and get traction. Here's Lisa Watson, Dean of Schwartz School of Business.
Thanks, Kelly. We really had a really important conversation as deans in the Atlantic region about the need for more support in terms of being able to deliver a curriculum that wasn't properly indigenized and also was able to be a little bit modular so that we could capture both local Indigenous culture and content as well as being able to incorporate more national and international perspectives. It's really, really difficult, obviously, as allies to feel comfortable delivering that kind of material. And it puts a lot of pressure on our local Indigenous instructors to be relied on to do that on their own. So it was really great conversation about how Luminary could really help lead the way in designing and delivering and sharing that material with different institutions across the country. So really, really excited to see what comes of it.
It's great, Lisa. And from there, we were accepted to present Luminary with a group of deans. We presented at the international, that AASCB conference, International Business Deans in Toronto in the fall. And Keith Willoughby, one of the presenters, talked about the role and importance of curriculum, community, and commitment.
As Kelly mentioned, my work over the past number of years with Luminary has been impactful for my deanship at the Edwards School of Business, University of Saskatchewan. But I've also seen how it's a way for us as business schools to advance forward on some key initiatives. If we think of business schools, we are naturally positioned that we have access to curriculum. We have access to the pedagogy that we deliver. We have access to faculty who have academic backgrounds, faculty who have professional backgrounds, and they bring such a stellar voice and experience into the classroom. Curriculum is incredibly important for universities, but especially for business schools, because as society continues to evolve, as new situations emerge, the curriculum must maintain relevance and currency with particular situations. Therefore, the work that Kelly is doing with Luminary for advancing Indigenous engagement and innovation is a tremendous way of demonstrating that connectivity to real life situations that are currently relevant in our Canadian economy. The curriculum that we need, though, that again is held within the universities, that is the purview of faculty experts, must have a community connection in order for it to be incredibly impactful. We know as university leaders and as business schools that we don't want the good work we do to sit on a shelf for it to be read just by a few. But if we can leverage our work with curriculum to engage with a broader community, that can amplify the good work that we're doing, and it can strengthen the powerful connections that we're making to groups all around us. Therefore, the curriculum and community connection is so impactful and important. One way that we can demonstrate that curriculum and community connection is through case studies, which are examples of actual situations facing real organizations where we can convey key concepts into the curriculum that will definitely have that community engagement perspective. The benefit of this going forward is once we have the curriculum expert material connected with true community needs, this is a way for us demonstrating commitment. We know as business schools, as university champions across Canada, we are moving forward with elements that foster truth and enable reconciliation. What better way do we have than within Indigenous cases, within other curriculum materials that can demonstrate our commitment to move forward? This is a way that we can learn from knowledge keepers. We can connect with Indigenous organizations. We can engage learning that will impact not just current students in the classroom, but future students as well. And it will have a deep and lasting and pervasive impact within our academic programs.
All right, going forward, people like Terry Godfrey have been providing ideas and advice on how we can grow this modular programming, removing obstacles, meeting everybody where they're at, and how to really transform education across the country. And of course, Chief Darcy Bear, who was in one of our Phoenix presenters, again, really harnessing research and innovation to create these commercial opportunities, products, and processes. And he's doing some great work in the area of health innovation. So going forward, this whole idea of collaborative and cooperative models, right? You're hearing that we have an opportunity to look at collaborators, and this is an opportunity for expression of interest, inviting people, looking at the product platform, the needs and gaps that we could be addressing, looking at how to build the governance and networks. We have advisors and guides that are stepping forward that will continue working with us. And of course, you need a funding partnership plan. And so you need resources to mobilize these types of ideas. And let me just hide these meeting controls. We've been shopping this idea around, and there's momentum. So the Royal Bank of Canada, Carolyn mentioned, they made a contribution, very keen on this, on Luminary's concept of a Knowledge Keepers Lodge and Center. So we have a $100,000 commitment there over 2 years. 6 deans have committed funds, one for $25,000. The Kachita Foundation, we're going to hear from them in the spring, but we've requested $80,000 over 2 years. And then we would look to new deans, and we would look to new funding from private sector foundation and research agencies. So this is really the idea of cooperative and collaborative programming, lower cost curriculum and tools and resources and training for everybody through this collaborative and cooperative programming approach. All right, so if you're interested, by the way, in this, reach out to klindsay at iworks.org, and we'll put you on the planning team. And we're going to aim to have this ready to present in September at the Indigenous Innovation Summit. All right, over to our breakout session. This is going to be a short session. We're going to have to reduce it to 25 minutes, or maybe even down to 20 minutes. But you're going to be in small groups. And in order to sort of introduce what you're going to talk about, over to Bob Chartier.
Thanks, Kelly. A number of times over the course of the morning and afternoon here, we've heard the word engagement. And one of the things that Luminary is so keen on is learning new engagement tools and practices, how we really engage citizens and how we engage workplaces. So with that spirit, we're going to do a breakout session here, and it's sort of based on the cafe model, if you will. Great leaders, you've heard some thought leaders. They nailed you with some ideas. Now we want you to react with each other. Questions in the first 2/3 of this is going to be, what are we doing well already? You got to imagine, you got to realize that we're already doing some good stuff, and so you can flag that. What's still tricky, based on what I heard from, Manly Begay, based on what I heard from the Brazilian, whatever, I think we're still in a little bit of trouble here. It's still a bit tricky for us. And then the innovative part, number 3, I heard this today. I think we could start doing that in our business school or in our work. And at the end, I want you to also think about what is it after today, still, after all these wonderful thought leaders, what are some big unanswered questions that I would love to ask Professor Newhouse So off you go into those breakout rooms. This time, I noticed from the last breakout room, just introduce yourself very quickly, and then just give us one. What am I doing well? I'm doing this, and get at it really quickly, because there's not a lot of time, and we want you to tackle some of these questions. Off you go.
So as we sort of close out today, one of our advisory council members is Cadmus Delorme. He's the former chief of Cowessess First Nation. He's president of Four Winds, and he's just been announced last year the chancellor of the University of Regina. And so we're going to bring his thoughts here in terms of the good work that everyone here is doing on this innovation journey and reconciliation journey, and this idea of creating a charter for change.
Thanks, Kelly, and good afternoon, everybody. Right now, today in this country, we all inherited a history. Nobody created the Indian Act, the 60s scoop, the residential school policy, and our institutions now, when it comes to higher learning, need to pivot and understand the role they play when it comes to innovation, reconciliation, and what we're talking about today. Case studies are foundational to this. in order to do the case studies, every institution has an Indigenous community in their backyard. Do we know those communities? Do we understand the economic, the social impact, and so forth? From these understandings of knowing who's in our backyard, it then comes into what kind of case studies can prepare our next students for. Curriculum put us in this moment to not understand what reconciliation means, meaning that many things we learned in the 70s, 80s, 90s, early 2000s play a different role now in what the reality and truth is. So these case studies are going to set it right. And so these case studies have to be authentic. They have to understand and respect that Indigenous perspective. But moving forward, we just got to make sure that our institutions and the values that we represent have the same and similar understanding and respect to the communities that we are trying to empower. Because at the end of the day, we all want to walk side by side when it comes to the journey and the marathon of reconciliation. A charter for change will allow us to stay motivated, to stay strategic, to bringing the tactics to what we're doing. Not one person has the answer, but when you have a framework and a charter, it allows us in those moments of good times to assure we're on that same journey, but in times of unknown, because we're going to be in uncharted territories doing this, that the charter will allow us to keep each other motivated, keep our feet to the fire, but at the same time, keep each other going on where we all need to go when it comes to reconciliation.
Thank you, Cadmus. The Charter for Change. And so as we close out today, we've been listening and working with you. We know that there are financial pressures facing post-secondary institutions with the cutback on international student tuition fees. There are some real pressure points. The commitment's there. And so what we've done is we're introducing the Charter for Change partner program. There's no membership fees tier structure. It is a way to sign on, very similar to what we did in 2020 when we did the Luminary Charter with 150 partners who co-created the Luminary strategy. So it's about leadership action and commitments, cooperative and collaborative programming, professional development webinars and seminars. There's going to be, of course, continue with the survey and benchmarking, data and strategy work, introducing executive academic strategy and planning, and of course, the Innovation Summit this September. So it's all reconciliation action together. It's going to be available in March, on March 2nd, and you'll be able to review it, receive it, and sign up. Ladies and gentlemen, we have Charter for Change champions at this forum and throughout Canada and around the world. People like Bob Casius, the former Dean of Business, former President and Vice President Academic at First Nations University of Canada, know that we can harness research and innovation to transform economies, communities, and well-being. And by bringing Indigenous knowledge, practices, systems, and worldviews, we will refine innovation and well-being for all of our relations. And this truly is what it's about. It's for all of our relations, our allies, the land, the four-legged, the winged ones. And so Bob is the kind of champion that we'll be able to turn to as we mobilize the Charter for Change together. Terry Lynn, over to you to wrap up in terms of what's next, and then our song and our closing with the elder.
All right. Thank you, Kelly. So just very quickly, thank you again, all of you, for staying with us for this session. Like Kelly mentioned, we are going to be launching the Charter for Change program. That's going to be happening next month. So we will be sharing that with you all. And if you're interested, we are looking to get a group of like-minded people together to keep the conversation going. We're talking about the themes that were presented today as we're building up into the Indigenous Innovation Summit. The bigger we can grow our network, the better. So thank you for considering that, and stay tuned. We're also very excited to be launching Luminary's academic professional development training. So Dr. Tasha Brooks, our senior research lead, is going to be hosting these seminars. So there's limited space. We are sharing the link in the chat. It's also available on our website under events. So under luminary.work events, you can go and register, and there's going to be 2 sessions about Indigenous awareness. So basically like a 101 in terms of, and you can share this with, your faculty, yourself, depending on, where you are in your journey. But if you want to learn more about how to engage in a good way with Indigenous students, faculty, communities, then I really suggest that you consider these professional development sessions. So March 23rd and 30th, so those are both on Mondays, 8 a.m. to noon Pacific time. And, she has a really great session planned out. There's going to be some hands-on learning and some scenarios. So very much, using her professor hat in the design of this. So very excited to roll that out. We are going to be launching the 2026 Business School Indigenous Engagement Survey. So we did the 2025 with 48 institutions. We're looking to grow that number. So we rely on each of you to participate. There will be changes. It'll be a little bit more condensed. So we have to look forward to that, but that'll be rolling out in the early spring. So sometime around May 2026, we're hoping to have a summary of what we heard to be able to do some comparison and presentations at the Indigenous Innovation Summit, which will be in September. The next thing is our ASAC Luminary Indigenous Colloquium that's taking place at Grey Eagle Resort in Tsuut'ina Territory in Calgary. That is on May 21st. Again, all of these links and more information are getting put into the chat. Registration, I believe, is opening up sometime today. But if you are in the Calgary area and you do want to join us, it's open to everybody, even if you're not a member of ASAC. So come and listen to, we're showcasing business leaders and business leaders from the Calgary area, so Treaty 6 area or Treaty 7, and they're going to be sharing their experiences and what they're doing to create this economy for Indigenous communities. So we're really excited about that. Then we have the Indigenous Innovation Summit that's going to be taking place at Desautels Faculty of Management in McGill in Montreal on September 22nd to the 24th. I see it says 24th to 26th here, or it's 24th to the 26th. I'm messing up right now. I think it's the 22nd to the 24th. Anyway, the thing about that is we're launching the save the date soon. So if you do want to get information, if you are interested in attending, if you are interested in speaking, if you have an interesting research project or a partnership with Indigenous community or something innovative that's happening, reach out to us. You can send an email to admin@iWorks or directly to Kelly and I, or anybody on the team. There's also Tasha as well, to talk about your idea and see if it would be a fit for our program. We're going to be rolling that out, working on that full force now that the Ignite Forum is going to be behind us in a few minutes. So send an email and stay in touch. We will send you all of the save the date information and how to get an invitation, because it is an invitation only event. We only have capacity for about 100 people. So stay tuned and put that into your calendars if you're interested in coming, so that we can connect with you on that. And I have one more thing to ask. So as part of our reporting requirements with our funder, we have to collect data on learning and on EDI. So it's completely anonymous. There's a QR code. If you can just pull out your phones, take a minute to answer the questions, very basic. There's 2 questions, and I would really appreciate that. It just helps us with our reporting back to SSF. So we'll leave that up there for you guys to take a look at. And there's the first question. I'll advance it to the second question in about 30 seconds. And then we will continue with our closing prayer. So just give it a minute.
And you were right. The date is September 22, 23, 24 for the second annual Indigenous Innovation Summit. We'll make the change on the PowerPoint, and but everyone can note that. And then you're right. We'll go to our song and closing prayer.
Yeah, so I'm getting a couple of answers floating in. I will close this one and move to the next question in 10 seconds. So if you can just get that into this. The next question is now live. I'll give you a little bit more time because that is EDI. But again, like I said, it's completely anonymous. It's just a statistic that we report on. So, and I'll leave that open. You can take the time to do that while we go into our closing song.
Sure. So Dr. Wanda Watney, who you heard from, was with us in 2019 when we launched the very first workshop on this whole area of Indigenous innovation. And she graciously, as a gift to all of you and a thank you for participating, is gifting us all a song. Wanda, you were there with us at the very beginning in 2019, and you honored us with a song. And you are again honoring us with a song today as we bring this forum to a close. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Kelly. This is a song that was gifted to me by my father. It's a love song. It's Cree. We're from Red Pheasant Cree Nation. Yai hi ya, yai hi ya, we hi ya, yai hi ya, we hi ya, eh hi ya, yai hi ya, yai hi ya, we hi ya. Ya, eh, hi, ya, we, hi, ya, eh, hi, ya. Matio pepue, tapue tina heske niti moves, tapue titipehen, papiane, we, hi, ya, eh, hi, ya. Ya, ha, ya, ya, ha, ya, we, ha, ya, ya, ha, ya, we, ha, ya, we, ha, ya, ya, ha, ya, ya, ha, ya, we, ha, ya. Ya, ha, ya, we, ha, ya, eh, ha, ya.
She has a book, Engraved on Our Nations, edited by Wanda and Fred Ween. It's about Indigenous economic tenacity. A great resource for you. Give that a shout out. Listen, on behalf of all of our team, from Terry Lynn and Tasha and Craig and myself and Bob and Adam and the team working behind the scenes, all the people working on the technology, and even all of you, thanks for supporting this important work ahead. And I hope you see that this work is going to inform on what we design and put into the summit in 2026 with Yolanda Chan, the Dean of the Desautels Faculty of Management. A big shout out to them. And McGill University. I stopped sharing. You've been tremendous. And we were just saying, the way you opened up about everything from innovation to our traditional and ancient knowledges to free trade, including the fur trade. This is what it's about, is we're creating economic well-being for people, the communities, the land. And you've been guiding us for many years. And we're going to continue to need that guidance as we go forward. So, ladies and gentlemen, somehow we were able to bring this in literally to the minute. And we're going to turn to our elder for the closing prayer. Miigwech to all of you for joining, and thank you for working. We look forward to continuing to support your good work and moving ahead with Indigenous economic innovation. Elder Leona Carter.
I just wanted to say thank you to Kelly and your staff organizers for having this absolutely wonderful, inspiring summit, that you had. I also want to mention Cadamus Delorme. He's one of my little inspiring people that every time he talks, I gain some more knowledge. I call him our modern day warrior. He just keeps going, and I just love that. Anyway, I just pray that the title of this summit has ignited people in the academic forums to change some of the curriculums there was somebody that said to include community engagement when they're doing the curriculum. That to me is just so forward looking. If the academics can do that, we would be gaining lots in the Indigenous world. And then also the research, using Indigenous knowledge and wisdom in the research. It's just so I think it's just going to help everybody come to an understanding of what Indigenous business means and how we've lived and how we want to continue to live in the modern world, And so I just want to say thank you to all of you for participating in this.